I've got the founder of Deep Focus with us, Ian Schafer. I've known Ian since the mid 2000s when we were both in the digital agency business. He went on to being the chief experience officer of the Engine Group post his acquisition. And most recently, he's become the co-founder and CEO of a company called Kindred. Now, if you haven't heard of Kindred before, they're a platform for ESG leadership development, which is something that I think is becoming increasingly important for businesses as they try and find their place in the modern world. Now, if you haven't heard of Ian, he's actually been named a media maven by Advertising Age. He was named a young one by Adweek. He was one of Campaign Magazine's 40 over 40. He was Business Insider's coolest people in tech at one point. But my personal favorite of all the recognition that I've seen him noted for, as he likes to say, was being dubbed annoying by his kids. So Ian, has certainly had his fair share of success in his career. But I think it's worth noting, kind of what is success? Is that wealth? Is that fame? Is it recognition by your peers? Is that personal contentment? All of those things I think could be debated, but depending on how you look at the world. So while he's had some great success and certainly achieved profit, today's episode is all about his quest to align purpose and profit. And I think we're going to find this a very interesting chat given some of the very unique experiences that Ian's had in his career. And with that, here we go with another week of OSHIP. Ian, welcome to OSHIP. How are you?
Thank you for having me. I love to follow a graceful poop. Not mine. In the video.
I love also following graceful poop, and I'm glad that we're both here with my poop intro that we can enjoy that together. So for those of you who are listening instead of watching OSHIP and you're maybe tuning into the audio version of OSHIP for the first time, definitely check a video version, or you have no idea what we're talking about and are probably already disconnecting the episode by now.
We'll fix it.
All jokes aside, Ian, I'm so glad you're here. You're a big personality. It's always very insightful and frankly very entertaining to listen, chat, or talk with. But I think I'd love to just kind of start a little bit at the beginning of this journey. When you were at Deep Focus, again, where I kind of started my personal journey with you. I saw you interacting with some incredible leaders within your own team. You were engaging with some incredible clients, and I really feel like that gave you a lot of perspective into basically the big face of business. And I think it had a pretty profound impact on you as I watched you kind of personally transform in your journey in that role. I'd love to understand where this all started for you as you kind of found your quest to find alignment between purpose and profit.
Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you for having me on. It's a joy to be able to spend this time with you.
My pleasure, buddy.
I get there is, just like with everybody, like there are a series of experiences that I had that made me realize that success in business or success in general did not meet the definition that I had thought it would mean when I was younger. I've worked in places like Miramax Films, for example, a place that was notorious for a lot of different things, and honestly, not realizing just how notorious it was until years after the fact. But I left that company. One of the many reasons why I left was because of the treatment of employees, was because of the lack of respect given to other people's opinions, and frankly, just a lot of misogyny, right? And that was something that I could not bear to witness day in and day out. So I left, and that was what a 26-year-old would do, would be to fly away. But I did so not to another company. I said, I cannot work for another business and have this happening around me. So decided to build my own. That's what Deep Focus became. But the context of Deep Focus was meant to transform other businesses, right? So yes, we positioned ourselves as an agency, but we also really laser focused on the entertainment industry because I felt that that was the industry that was, at the time, the most greatest, that had the greatest need for digital transformation. Especially with all the piracy that was going on, all the privacy things that were coming, kind of moves to streaming, the rise of social media, all of that was happening in a way that I thought would completely change the way consumers consume, especially content. And just spent years, working with companies, trying to help them transform and realizing that the solution is not hiring a chief digital officer.
Mm-hmm.
The solution is the CEO taking it seriously enough where it becomes a mandate throughout the company. And then recognizing the skills gap that exists between people, again, who know what's coming and who are prepared for what's coming.
So fundamentally, it's not about one agent of change, and it's about embedding the change fundamentally in the culture and the DNA of the business.
Yeah, and it's like you could say you're doing all you want, but unless you're actually doing it, you're also not learning, right? And so, as we expanded the agency, just in terms of size, but also in terms of client base, we started working with large multinational, consumer packaged goods companies, technology companies, telecom companies, right? And so their words were there for sure, right? Again, at digital too, but then their words started coming out, as environmental issues started popping up. I mean, they've been popping up for quite some time, but it started becoming okay to talk about, or non-polarized to talk about, as social issues became, a bigger deal to people. The latest research from Edelman says that 68% of people trust business and business leaders to step in and take action on things that governments won't. Right? It's the last institution with any trust left. And yes, that holds true in terms of whether or not I can trust the company that their products are going to fail me. But it's also about shared values, right? And people were changing their buying decisions, or at least their loyalty decisions, to companies that were making better decisions. And again, it's yes, digital for sure, because that's all about convenience, price, versatility, right? But when kind of sustainability issues, social issues started becoming a bigger part of the conversation, a lot of brands were first out there to say something, but their words were way ahead of their actions. And as we were working with more and more,
then it smells like marketing. Doesn't feel sincere.
Well, that's what whenever somebody says brand purpose, I'm like, brand corporate purpose. If the company doesn't have the purpose, the brand isn't going to magically change the font, right, and make that real. So, and again, it's just the old way of caring was writing a check, and we all know that caring means more than just writing a check. In many cases, writing a check is actually laundering a reputation, not actually helping a situation. So, that was just, something I saw happening more and more. We were fielding more and more calls from companies who were looking to kind of steer their marketing and advertising towards social issues, but really would fail every test when it pertained to how they were behaving as an entity. And at the end of the day, companies don't make decisions, people do. So what is it that needs to happen for people to make better decisions, right? About the way they behave. And that was a burning question that I had. I often ask myself that question in just as a leader and an operator of my own company. What are the things that we can be doing? We didn't have a footprint like a global retailer does, right? We had a few offices around the world, great, but they were not we weren't leaving behind a trail of carbon. Right. But we were leaving, we were working with, hundreds, not thousands of people. And those calls started coming from inside the house. What are we doing on this? What are we going to do about that? Why is my experience different from somebody else's experience here? And frankly, a lot of people managing also made me realize just how different the lived experiences are of everybody that come to work at a company every day. And the assumption that everyone checks all that stuff at home is naive.
Not true. Yeah.
And to create an environment where people feel like they belong is hard. I'm still working on it.
Just to set the tone, I think you've laid out, I think, the importance of it. Where have you seen this go really wrong when you think about whether it's people you've worked with directly or just things you've observed in the media, where this kind of lack of substance, alignment, whatever you want to call it, has kind of really blown up in people's faces?
I mean, you see it. I mean, we see it every day. I don't want to call out. I don't want to go out and call out companies here
Show me them and then
necessarily.
mock them on their ship and tell them they're naughty.
They get called
We'll
out.
wag our fingers at them, be like,
They
bad.
get called out all the time, and I actually like. I want to be a part of the solution. Again, not a part of the problem here. But you've had company like very, very, very well-known companies who've become famous for their words, right? Still have to manage like lawsuits against them by former employees, former endorsees, because of the unfair treatment, right? And I think that when you have calls for like social justice, but people don't feel like justice happens, inside of a company itself, right? Like if people aren't seeing, accusations all the way through, for example, right? Policies not being adhered to, or just bad policy in general. Like we see that every day. It gets called out every day. I mean, look at what CEO turnover has been. We talked about CMO turnover for years. Look at like CEO turnover, right? Like people are getting forced out, not really because of financial performance, because it seems like companies are doing by and large like pretty okay, but for like the other vulnerabilities that they bring to an organization. And again, I think that's just because everyone's voice has been amplified, right? Like companies have like employee resource groups now that are often like, acting like, power centers that are starting to look more like unions, right? In unionized industries. They're not just like planning parties for Heritage Month, right? They're actively like, voicing the concerns and opinions of people who work in a company because guess what? Their voices deserve to be heard. And like these are just things that we were starting to play out. And I think like part of this is a future of work issue, because I think you
I'm
might
obviously
ignore it.
very passionate about.
Yeah. Like you might ignore it if you were just like hearing it in the hallway, right? Or passing someone at a water cooler, or they probably like stop talking if their boss was walking by. But now these things like leave a trail on Slack. Right? They're in like listservs. There's documentation for all of this. And I just think that, more and more companies are feeling like if we don't get this right, like this is going to be like not only publicly humiliating, but this is going to affect our balance sheet, our market cap.
Funny, people can, I think, every business owner, leader, entrepreneur, however you want to look at it, I think can take a stance on saying, look, I choose to not be involved in any of these things. But but if they choose to, then that maybe it's the path forward isn't always the most obvious one. I'd love to use that as a segue for you to tell us a little bit more about Kindred, and your latest kind of creation. And I think what are you like more than 2 or 3 years in now, aren't you, Ian?
Yeah, we are probably about 2.5 years in.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, congrats on that front. So tell us more about Kindred for the audience members who don't know anything about your company.
Yeah. So what Kindred is today, we'll get to what it was. What Kindred is today is a platform, is a membership platform for ESG leadership development. And for those unfamiliar with ESG, that's environmental, social, and governance issues. It's been a financial and investment term for years. It's starting to crack mainstream consciousness as a catch-all for issues like sustainability, mental health in the workplace, diversity, equity and inclusion, and belonging. Gender pay equity, right? All of these issues that I think people thought could be handled by HR maybe in the past. We realized that was kind of triage for a lot of the pain that was inflicted upon people by the company's actions themselves. Again, like willfully or otherwise. I just think that actions were left unchecked and left unbalanced. And again, like we can fix that now. Like we can be like on a quest for a more perfect company. I think just like we're on a quest to be a more perfect union as a country, right? Like there's no one's going to pass a purity test, plain and simple. But people can be better prepared for the decisions that they're going to have to make on all of these fronts, especially when the ground is constantly changing beneath their feet. So as we talk to hundreds, if not thousands of leaders, both specialists and generalists, we learned that there was a giant gap in 3 areas: in education, right? In understanding what is going on today, literally today, like in the world of like sustainability, climate crisis, supply chain management, things like that. But also on, diversity fronts, equity fronts, mental health fronts, We all hear, I feel like me, like you hear the word burnout a lot in conversations that you have with people, because this is freaking hard what we're all going through. And different people are going through it through different means. So it's not everybody's pain is the same, right? And so having a better understanding of what that is needs to affect your company policies, and you're not constantly.
What's interesting about that kind of burnout worth noting? I think there is a some people can deal with, let's call it, kind of rational stress of, hey, I have too much work, or I have this very binary thing that I need to deal with. But because some of these subjects can be very unclear for people, I think it causes an extra level of fatigue or stress or burnout around them, because a lot of people, when it's one thing to be able to say, look, I understand, I can handle this stress because I still understand I need to get from point A to point B. But if you don't know how to get to point B, or you're not sure whether you're running to B, C, or D, that's extra stressful for people. And I think it can really take its toll on both leadership and a company's culture.
And we should also acknowledge how uncomfortable it is, right? It's
Yeah,
uncomfortable for
super
people to
uncomfortable.
bring up in some cases because they've been they may be tapped to help solve a problem, but that also probably means that they've been unduly burdened by that problem
Mhm.
at the company. And that's it's being like a digital transformation change agent is a lot different, and is often meant with a lot different pushback than being a diversity, equity, and inclusion change agent, right?
Mhm.
Being a whatever it is, it's like education is a critical part of that. Like knowing more about what you need to do is obviously a critical next step in actually making the decision to do
Yeah,
something. We
absolutely.
also learned that leadership development was something that was critical if companies are being rewarded by their ability to lead. And again, like companies, like yes, companies are leading companies, but they're filled with leaders who make decision, and they need to up level, their managerial expertise, wisdom, insights, if they're going to be expected to be that manager, that leader of the future as well, especially as it pertains to ESG. And then finally is it's community, right? And like you feel a lot more comfortable like jumping into the water when there are other people in it, right? You feel a lot better having a conversation where you can listen to others having it. You feel a lot better about the decisions you make on standards when they're the best practices of other companies. And what we found was there was an incredible lack of connectivity and a lack of community amongst professionals, even if they were in like a particular specialty area like
Mhm.
sustainability. They still weren't connecting with each other in really great ways. We're providing that opportunity. So between, again, like education, leadership development, and community, we're offering experience to leaders and their companies, where the return on their investment is felt exponentially, right away, whether that's, an individual on their quest to become a better leader, or a company on a quest to become a leading company on these fronts. So over the last, we've been around for less than a year in this incarnation, as a membership driven platform. And we've got over 260 companies now, with over 300 leaders of those companies, most of whom are in the C-suite, all going on this journey together. And the stories that we're hearing about what they're capable of doing, both individually and together, as force multipliers, is honestly like all I need to get out of bed every morning.
First off, that I love it. I love the positioning. I love the where you've netted out. But it wouldn't be oh ship if I didn't ask about an oh ship moment. So you've implied multiple times now that this is not where you started. I know from our prior conversations that you did start as an event business, which I think everyone watching knows was maybe not the best business to be in during a pandemic. Just saying. So, so could you talk a little bit about how you did that pivot, and how that evolution and journey went for you?
Yeah, I mean, evolution, right? Like Darwin is often misquoted on this one, but it's really like those who are most able to adapt are the ones who survive, not the
Yeah,
strongest, right? You just find
yeah,
strongest.
yeah. I agree. I agree with that. It doesn't have to be the strongest. It's a flexibility and adaptability.
Yeah. So, we started. If you think about it, from a few years ago, like 2018, a lot of talk was about purpose, right? You had brand purpose, you had purpose-driven X, Y, and Z. Purpose was kind of a word that people were using in lieu of, I guess, the modern definition of ESG. And we realized that this disruption was coming, right? It's pattern recognition. Like digital business transformation happened because obviously of people's adoption of technology, but purpose-led business transformation, as we were calling it, a couple of years ago, was being driven by increased transparency and accountability, right? So I guess accountability is probably forced transparency, right? Because most companies don't want to take accountability themselves. It's usually foisted upon them. And so companies were unprepared for that, but they were also unprepared to even breach the conversation. So, how do we raise the intensity or the urgency level around companies understanding how big of a role that they play in society, modern society? I think we were emerging at that time from an era where companies could kind of hide on Wall Street or in their stock prices, and get away and employ a very Milton Friedman approach of, profits enable you to make all the purpose that you want to make, right? To do all of the things that you'd like to do, because you can't do them. You can't write those checks to nonprofits, without those profits. So go for it. That license expired, right? Yeah. So we were at a point where, again, companies need to understand, if Walmart, made one change to their supply chain requirements, to improve the climate, that one decision could probably take a step forward, in terms of ameliorating some effects of climate change, because it means thousands of companies are now going to have to choose different products to build their products with, or different ingredients to build their products with. And so those, and all these companies, they exist within communities. And again, we've gotten from a place where we've seen that these companies exploited communities. We remember those Walmart documentaries, to companies now playing a critical role in those communities, because guess what? Americans' healthcare is tied to the place where they work. Right. And so the role that business plays in society has just been increasingly more important. And the people's voices who are affected by those companies' decisions have gotten louder and more influential. So it was critical that we bring everybody together to have that conversation, to be what I would call a more relevant, less tone deaf Davos, but an event that had all the inclusivity and cultural relevance of a South by Southwest. And that's what we were building a conference, an event, to be in May of 2020 at the same year.
And you bring the conference back, I assume, at some point, when the
maybe
permitting.
But I think
Dream's not dead; it's just delayed.
Yeah, well, I mean, the purpose of that event was to catalyze the conversation. Ironically, the thing that rendered the event moot, or I would say an anachronism, in that case, was COVID.
Yeah.
And what COVID also shined a light on, I would say, a couple of things. One is that the intersectionality of every issue that we face. So when you look at climate, the reason why a lot of people talk about it as climate justice is because it affects people differently. We don't all have the money to colonize Mars, right? We're dealing with the issues on the ground. And frankly, the communities that are often left holding the bag, are the ones who are most exposed, right, to the effects of climate change. Food insecurity, again, mental health. These are all issues that disproportionately affect certain, communities within our society, most notably people of color, right? And but they also affect all of us. So it's something that, again, just companies really needed to act on. And COVID showed that if you could pivot to bottling hand sanitizer during a pandemic, you can sure as hell figure out how to change the constitution of your board.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. You can literally wave a wand and do that. And so I don't know. So that the same thing that said you can't do the event was the thing that said, you know what? Everyone understands now the importance of all of this, because the call.
I would argue your event will be stronger because of the birth of the platform, because the platform will connect the dots between the events, and so the platform, it will always exist. And you could argue this is a conversation that requires continuity and ongoing engagement, and the platform is probably a smart move for it.
And can always benefit from bright, shiny objects. Right? That's what events are, right? They're reasons for people to get on a plane.
Yeah, luckily the founder was a digital wizard, so you were well positioned for that. So
necessity is the mother of invention.
Yeah, exactly. So Darwinism paying off there. So I'm going to do a callback to something you said earlier. I'm doing this off memory, so apologies if I quote this wrong. Please correct me if I'm wrong. You said there was a stat from Edelman that it was 67% of people put more faith in private companies over the government to provide some of these kind of transformational services that's called to society. Is that
68. 68.
68,
Yeah.
68. Okay, not too far off. Um, and so what I couldn't help but think to myself, I wonder how that applies in America versus Europe, where, it's kind of, we're so capitalism centric here, and we put such a, but there's been frankly, the last number of years, without getting into the politics of it, obviously a massively increased distrust in government from both parties, and then just kind of this shiny, capitalism as the the highest idol of the land kind of thing in the States. I'd be interested to see how this kind of plays out in different countries. It's not necessarily the subject of the show, but I'd love your take on it, because I think obviously you're living this every day.
Yeah. I mean, America is unique in a lot of different ways, both good and bad. I mentioned like healthcare being tied to employment. That's a uniquely American problem, or challenge, right? And I think, again, it puts more of the onus on business to step up in a lot of these cases, including like the privatization of healthcare, right? Whereas in other companies, many other countries have socialized medicine, right? Which is supported by the government. And obviously there's that could in some cases lead to trust, and also even more mistrust. But we just have like a unique flavor of capitalism here. One that we try as much as we can to keep as pure as we can. But as we've seen, some of the most sweeping changes to American society that have benefited the most people have actually been things that feel more socialist in policy, right? Like Social Security, like some aspects of healthcare reform, Medicare, right? Like, so the welfare, right? Like these are all things that seem like exceptions in our case, but are standard in other countries. And I think, while like we always talk about capitalism and democracy as like this great experiment, it's weird to just conduct like your own experiments without looking at the things that are working everywhere else.
Yeah.
Because there are a lot of other scientists hard at work on those experiments too. And that's why you have peer reviews and publications and things like that. And so it'd be wise for us to continue to look elsewhere to see like, what are other decisions that countries are making? How can they like make sense here? And, without necessarily just blindly painting something, which is again part of the elements of what also has led to tribalism here. And social media has played a big role in that, but that might be another podcast.
Yeah. That's funny.
But like to say like, let's try like, let's have the courage to try things. I'm not saying move fast and break things, because you don't want to break people. But again, like we should try things here. And I think, we can't trust government to move fast, or to do like adequate risk assessment.
That's for sure.
So companies have to do it.
So I want to narrow down on this company side for a second. So when your group and your company obviously helps facilitate a lot of this change, but if you had to meet a CEO or board or founders, tomorrow, and they said to you, Ian, give me some guidance on how I should try and align purpose and profit within my business. What would be maybe the one or two things that would be, at least at a high level, you'd say this is where you need to start your journey?
Yeah, well, I think they need to look at kind of to again draw parallels on things that have worked in the past. They have to look at who are the leading companies in these areas and what are the rewards that they're reaping from it. And by the way, those rewards could be like, it costs less to recruit new employees, and frankly, less to retain them. It means that by providing a healthy work environment, you don't have to compensate for an unhealthy work environment by paying people more to come to work there. Right. I'm not saying pay people less generally. I'm just saying that like sometimes like higher salaries are compensation for a horrible work-life balance. Right. Or, I mean, especially now that when work is in the home for so many people, or people are forced to go to work in a place that they might feel is unsafe. Like these are things that are going to come up, and it's worth understanding what the vulnerabilities are to the organization, especially in financial terms, because that's really often what gets a company to take some kind of action. It's probably either financial upside or the requisite fear of financial downside. And the same as far as reputation, because no one wants to be painted, as evil. Some companies have gone so far as to make their mission statement say that we are not that, and then have had to amend it because, again, they are not pure either, right? And
Yeah,
so,
don't want people drifting over to the dark side.
yeah, so it's like, these are all things that, again, like, look, there's going to be. I would tell somebody, like, there are $50 billion that is being poured by ESG focused funds into American businesses this year. Do you want access to them? Do you want your stock to move up because they are buying up shares of your company because you're leading in this area and therefore going to be seen as a more sustainable business going forward? One of the greatest things that I've found about all of this is that the word sustainability has broadened to be inclusive of so many different things. It's not just like, are you going paperless? Right? It's like, can you make changes that are going to be necessary for the next 10 years? It's a long-term view as opposed to a short-term view. And thankfully, we've got organizations like Long-Term Stock Exchange, for example, out there, who are saying to companies, you've got to change your standards. NASDAQ just successfully petitioned the SEC to be able to ask companies for their race and gender disclosures in order to get listed on NASDAQ. So regulation is coming too. So there's so many reasons why it makes sense for a company to now like go in this, because I would just point back to a prior era, which we're practically still in, which is saying, look at the companies that failed on that front. Look where they are. Some of them are like out of business. Many of them are out of business. And I'm not saying like the penalty for not getting ESG right is going out of business, but it's certainly going to make it more expensive to do business in the long run.
So I want to go back to this subject of recommendations in a minute, but I want to go down the rabbit hole of ESG for a moment. So you noted earlier that a lot of this kind of ESG movement has been around in the financial world for a while. We're seeing that kind of term starting to enter the mainstream a little bit more now. But what for people out there who are inspired by these kind of things, subjects we're discussing right now, and maybe want to build entire businesses around them, what do you know about the ESG funds that are out there and how people are investing in ESG initiatives and ESG focused businesses?
Yeah, so there are ESG funds. There are impact funds, which are not necessarily ESG funds, but who are investing in companies who are leaving a positive impact on the world, which is more of an attitudinal approach. ESG is more of, again, like key measure approach, right? You're looking at sustainability reporting, gender equity reporting, could be employee happiness reporting, like whatever the standards develop into. ESG funds basically have a thesis that says, the companies that, are making smarter decisions, more sustainable decisions, are going to be in a stronger position in 5 to 10 years. It's hard to argue with that because like businesses that are solely extracting from, again, the environment or the economy are probably not going to be sustainable in the long run. And so do that. And if you just look at the numbers, again, like I keep going back to numbers because I think sometimes that's the only thing that forces a decision hand. The investor ESG software market alone, like software that helps ESG investors make smarter decisions, companies like Blackstone, Bloomberg. I said Blackstone, I meant BlackRock, but Blackstone too, actually.
Which I was doing the mental gymnastics in my head to figure that one out. Yeah, BlackRock.
Honestly, look, Blackstone has a ESG fund. Like it's really like companies who have historically not gone there because they didn't want to be seen as activists, right?
Yeah.
Now see it as like, what? It's obvious. The writing is on the wall, right? And so, but BlackRock, who's been a leader and also is a Kindred member as a company, they're fueling the growth of a $1.5 billion ESG investor software market with a CAGR, a common annual growth rate of 15% every year. That is just software that helps investors make better ESG decisions. It's $1.5 billion industry. So you can imagine, I firmly believe that the companies that will be the most successful over the next decade are going to be the ones who place the proper priority level, which I would say is damn near the top for ESG related decision making. And that's why, again, it was just so obvious to us, like what was needed, because when you look at the number of decisions need to be made versus the lack of preparation to make those decisions, it was quite clear what we needed to do. And that's why we went there.
So I'm going to take this one last place as a kind of final question for today. When you think about a lot of the things we've talked about, I think are applied at the company level. We're talking about big initiatives about how you focus this in when you're a company or a big business, small business, rising business, whatever it is. But some of the people that are listening or watching OSHIP right now might be saying, how do I apply this to my personal life? I don't have a big company, or my company doesn't do this kind of stuff. Are there practices, are there things that I can apply this thinking to my everyday individual life, my own brand, my personal brand, but again, to your point, maybe that's not really about your personal brand anymore, just like it's about a corporate mission, a corporate purpose versus a brand purpose, your purpose. How do you apply this kind of stuff in your own world? Would you have any guidance or tips for people that are maybe thinking or asking those kind of questions?
Well, first, let me say that any reputation that's built upon what you say, as opposed to a reputation built on what you do, is BS. That's your like social media clout, right? And so the real reputation that you have is because of the things that you've done, not because of the things that you said, right? And so, so that's why I think like a lot of the personal brand stuff, I think we can see through it now, and because really it's like because if someone says one thing a lot, if they post a lot of like LinkedIn tropes on social media, right, that will all get thrown out the window when we learn about their bad behavior, right? So, so that's one thing I would say, but from a person, like I think it's actually okay to think about yourself as a professional and saying, in order for me to succeed, I need to get smarter about this. But getting smarter about issues related to environmental and social impact issues requires you to have a sense of humility, a keen and developed sense of empathy, and curiosity. And by the way, those are three things that companies can have, again, because their leaders are that way.
Yeah.
And I think it's going to be an important part of every company culture to instill humility, empathy, and curiosity as key values if they're going to expect to try to understand somebody's point of view that is not necessarily correlative to their own lived experience. Right? It's why like there's such a disproportionate number of white male CEOs who get a lot of this wrong. Their lived experiences do not reflect those of many others who did not have the privilege of being able to raise money easier, get a job easier, get paid more, like all of those things. And again, it takes some humility to understand that and appreciate that. But it takes moxie to actually do something about it. So like, these are all things, and I think it's okay for you to be seen. It's like, if I want to be a leader of tomorrow, I need to possess these traits. Go work on them. But it's not like you're not going to get there like you study for the LSATs.
Yeah, well said.
Right? Like you're going to get there through practice, through listening. I can't tell you, like, I swear every day I learn something new about actually like leading through all of this, prioritizing through all of this, working through all of this, because of the conversations I'm having with people. And I often get it wrong. And I think part of that humility is like being able to admit like when you get it wrong. I get things wrong every day. And I think everyone does, like to a certain degree, but can you use it to get better? And I think that's that requires commitment, right? But I think that's part of the curiosity, is always wanting to get better, always want to learn more different, better ways of doing things. I think in this case, digital used to be like to get to point A to B or A to Z faster, right? I think in this case, it's to help people grow from A to Z better. Because, let's face it, like, I think like if everyone looks back on their careers at the end of the day, they want to say, yes, I think in the past, they'd want to say, did I leave the company in a better place than when I joined it? But I think they'd also want to say, did I leave the world in a better place because I was in it?
Love some very strong sage-like wisdom in that last section. I really enjoyed that. One of the things you mentioned in there was listening,
Mhm.
And so, on that note, we're going to listen to some of the people in the audience who are asking questions. I want to thank everyone who's been watching. Some lovely comments. A shout out to Marcel Fairbairn. Thank you for watching. I'm glad you're enjoying Ian's comments so much. And I want to recognize Peter Ebanks. And Peter says, quote unquote, I work with a waste management solution based on plasma gasification. Is this something which would apply to Kindred and their ESG model?
Um, I'm not terribly familiar with plasma gasification, but what I would say is that if it is a part of the solution for clean energy, right,
Yeah.
or at least cleaner waste, right? I think that's something like look at the climate funds that are out there right now. Like look at what Chris Sacca is doing with lower carbon capital, right? And like he's by the way, like lower carbon capital started off as like kind of an impact fund, right? That wasn't necessarily designed to deliver the returns, I think, of a VC fund, but there was such strong demand from investors who want VC like returns on impact related investments because they believe it's possible. Like the appetite for this is so big. And we've got a lot of these climate investors, for example, in the Kindred community, not just again providing expertise and knowledge, but getting expertise and knowledge that, yeah, like that is a critical part of ESG because it is part of like if it's not part of the supply chain, it's part of the waste chain. But that's still what goes in comes out. To go back to the poop.
I love that. You can't no better way to end the show than a perfect callback to the beginning. My head is spinning with some new ideas to talk to Ian about ways we can work together. I'm really excited for you. I love that you found this rhythm in life where you're doing something that it clearly excites you as an entrepreneur, but it also makes you feel like you're making an impact on the world and helping other people make an impact on the world. I admire you as always for that continued journey as an entrepreneur. I do want to give a quick shout out to everyone that's been watching. Thank you for tuning in. The best thing that you can do to support this show is give us a like, thumbs up, share us with your social feed, tell a friend, post an episode on any place you can to get the word out. OSHIP is something we do really just because we're passionate about sharing this great content and these leaders who so generously give their time to come and chat with us and talk about issues that are powerful and important and can shape all of our lives. So if you enjoy the content that we create, please do a little bit to help by just subscribing, following, liking, sharing, and helping us get the word out there. And we actually, if you want to learn more about OSHIP, check out the newly released oshipshow.com. And we have direct links now to all of the different places that you can listen to OSHIP in its audio format as a podcast, as well as all the different places that you can watch us in video format as well. Really, really easy now to send that to folks and let them kind of engage OSHIP in the way that they want to. I also want to give another massive thanks to Ian. Thank you so much for coming on. You can follow Ian on Twitter at Schafer. You can also hit up his company at Kindred. He's an active Twitter user, or you can obviously find him at his website. Any last things you want to share, Ian, before we call it for the day?
Yeah, sure. Just a shout out to my incredible, indefatigable co-founder, Alyssa Bick. And the entire team that's building Kindred every day, and of course our members, who are doing such amazing things with the experience that we're providing to them, really proving out that the most effective strategy is actually like teaching them to fish, as opposed to the old way of doing things, where I would say we would be providing services, right? If you really want to deliver impact at scale, you've got to learn how to do it yourself. And so I appreciate everyone's commitment to what we're building.
I love it. Well, Ian, don't go anywhere. I'll see you in the after show. And everyone, thank you so much for watching our ship. We'll see you next week. Thanks so much.